If you followed my channel, you're privy to and maybe even a little exhausted by a reoccurring chorus in my film criticism. Domestic horror films have been in a state of creative stasis over the last few years, often relying on scare tactics developed 30, 40, or even 80 years ago. There seems to be very little forward momentum in the genre until you move outside U.S. borders. Remember that I mentioned U.S. borders and draw your own conclusions. This is preposterous and, in my opinion, hurtling us towards another horror drought like we experienced in the 90s. It certainly doesn't feel like it right now, with horror blockbusters like It Chapter 2 making the kind of money that we haven't seen since the heyday of The Exorcist and Jaws. And yet, horror must capture the fears of the zeitgeist in any given time period to remain compelling to its audience. There's a reason millennials react differently to the Bronze Age classics of the genre from the 70s and 80s. The elements in a film like The Omen that served as triggers for our fear responses are barely relevant to kids born in the 21st century. Of course, it's a two-way street, with millennials favoring the Conjuring universe, while more seasoned fans are likely to be excited by A24's releases, such as The Witch and Hereditary. This is the landscape we find ourselves in. Hollywood has always treated horror as a disposable genre that appeals mostly to the crowd under 25. A few specialty production shingles aside, the big studios are following that simple product development and marketing scheme to a letter. To do this, they've made the conscious effort to embrace the social mores that they equate with millennials, mainly drawing these from social media, which is in itself problematic. I recently saw Rambo, Last Blood. It's not a horror movie, so I didn't review it for the channel, but it does have some cross-content appeals for fans of the genre. Rambo has the gratuitous violence and gore that's usually reserved for slasher films. I enjoyed the film for what it was and what it is. Reviews have not shared my sentiments about Rambo. Is this because it's poorly made, badly written, or horribly acted? No. In many cases, it's because the subject matter vaguely mirrored the heated immigration debate that has been consuming the news cycle for the last few years. Without regard for nuance, reviewers savaged the film for its supposed agenda. I'm not going to push this out of bounds. I'm not going to say that their criticisms of an action film has put them in a position to virtue signal support for the Mexican cartels. That's no better than suggesting people who enjoyed the movie all wear MAGA hats to the gun range. See? Nuance. It can be done. As a libertarian, both politically and socially, I'm also not saying that reviewers should be forbade from reviewing any film in any way they see fit. That doesn't mean that there isn't a cost associated with freedom, however. We all allow influencers to divide us and nudge us in the direction of one film or another. There's a responsibility that comes with that power, especially when it comes to the largest media outlets. You know the genre news sites, and if you've been reading them lately, you may feel like they're failing in that responsibility. Even though I'm the biggest proponent of effective horror films having relevance in their viewers' lives, they are, at their most basic level, escapist entertainment. The simple thrills of Jason or Michael carving his way through a line of college freshmen may carry the weight of modern urban mythology inside it, but it should never feel like it does. By focusing on political themes, whether real or projected onto the story by the reviewer, these reviewers are dividing us as an audience before we even buy a ticket. In fact, if we're told we must all be socialists if we want to support one movie, or Trump supporters if we watch another, we may just throw up our hands and see nothing at all. Some have labeled this movement towards making all media as inoffensive to everyone as possible as political correctness or cancel culture, or a half dozen other expressions, but I see it in a more basic light. Attempting to control discourse, whether it be a movie, a book, a stand-up comedian's routine, or an outdated flag, is a soft attempt at censorship, and that's something we should never applaud. Even when I agree with the fundamentals of an argument, I think the use of racial pejoratives is offensive, for instance, I'm still grossly opposed to telling anyone what they should think, how they should talk, or who they should be. This isn't a perfect situation. I'm not a fan of everyone's views, not by a long shot, but I'd rather they express them, because then I know exactly what they believe, how comfortable they are expressing it, and ultimately, who they are. Ignorance is never productive. So, telling readers not to see a movie because you disagree with its political stance is about the ugliest thing a professional, or even an amateur reviewer can do. It's a worse affront to the human condition to try to shut people up because you disagree with them than the sins you're supposedly trying to combat. As horror fans, we need to stand together as a community, and let the websites that support this kind of sly censorship know that we don't appreciate their position. This isn't a call for any sort of boycott, nor is it an attempt to control their content. That would be soft censorship as well, and not acceptable. What I am saying is we don't need to put bread on their table by clicking their articles. We can turn our heads away and consume content that encourages expression instead. The message is simple. Review movies, not ideologies.